Sexual role play. Healthy? Unhealthy? That's what we're going to be exploring today. Someone sent in a question about that, about sexual role play as a context for addressing sexual needs. So welcome to Ask Sean, where I explore all sorts of questions about being human and invite you, the listener, to become more present to yourself, your relationships, and your life. I'm Sean Slevin, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And if you have a question for me, I would love to hear that from you. You can send that in to me anonymously at asksean.org. So I'm just going to start by reading the question that this person sent in, and then we'll dive in. What are your thoughts about intimate role-playing with a loving partner? Similar to a crush, it seems to me it reflects a longing. But can it be a healthy way to explore our needs and desires with a trusted lover? Or is it generally unhealthy? I would love your thoughts on this. So this person is referencing their reference to a crush. They're referencing the video that I did about how to deal with a crush, how to work through having a crush on someone. So I recommend you take a peek at that as well, as that's going to get into some themes that I'm going to build on further here, because that's kind of where this person's thinking is going, is they're feeling some resonance with some of the content of that video, and yeah, kind of trying to make sense of how some of that applies here. So I'll just say up front, there's a lot of things, actually, a lot of foundational things I'm going to cover on the way to actually talking more specifically about role play. And so there will be some things I'll explore about role playing partway through, but really kind of my main thoughts about role playing will be at the very end. But those are going to make the most sense in the context of the overall flow. Because this person is intuiting correctly that there's potential for things to go sideways here, right? I don't think that role playing is automatically bad, so I'll say that up front. But I want to actually kind of work through some of the what they asked, what they're asking about here, and yeah, just kind of tease out some foundational elements that I think are really important. Some of which aren't specifically about role play exactly, but are some things that show up a lot in the sexual relationship. So the first is the use of the word needs. So they said can be a healthy way to explore our needs and desires. I like that they said needs and desires, but our needs in the context of sex. I'm paraphrasing there. So, the word need is tricky, right? Because we can use it in a way where, and I actually do this a lot, and I'll probably do this in this video without even thinking about it, where we're trying to give emphasis, right? And I think that's fine. I do kind of push a bit for, and when we're using this word in regards to ourselves in terms of human needs, I do think it's worthwhile to actually be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more strict. No, it doesn't sound like a fun word, but the reason is that, like, fundamental human needs are, like, we need nourishment, right? We need food, we need water, we need some degree of shelter, from the elements, and we need connection, right? So I actually do not think that our sexual desires are true needs, kind of within that definition. Now, I think that sexuality and sexual engagement with another human, I think it falls within connection, and so I think it's very important, right? But this, I mean, honestly, this gets into some philosophical differences, right? Where, and I'm not picking on this person who's writing in their thing, but I'm thinking more broadly. There's different philosophies about sex in our culture, right? there is a kind of sort of more materialistic view that we're just bodies, and so it doesn't matter, right? Like if I want to use another body and they want to use my body, then what does it matter? Um, Setting aside any kind of spiritual framework, just in terms of what I observe, in terms of how that plays out, like I think deep down what we're wanting is connection. Like we're wanting the feeling of being with another, right? Not just the endorphins, of sexual release. So certainly that feels good too. Um, and so I think so I'm just, putting my cards on the table, right? Like my view of humans, my hypothesis of humans is that what we really need is connection. Um, Sex can be a really lovely way to connect with another human. Kind of if it's done healthily, and there can be all sorts of particular caveats on that and whatnot, but um, so yeah, but I'm really cautious, I guess, to get kind of more back to thinking about talking about sexual needs. I'm cautious about using needs in relation to sexual encounters with a partner, because it's just so easy for that to slide into coercion without even meaning to. Like, so even well-intentioned people, right? Because we, again, like I said earlier, we tend to use the word need as a form of emphasis, right? And um, and so if I'm saying, well, this is a need, kind of the implication there, and often the energy is, you can't deny me. And that's really problematic when it's like, well, what I'm asking for is like requiring something of the other person, right? It's requiring something very vulnerable, very intimate. And it's essential, I would argue, to healthy sexual encounters, healthy sexual relationship, that both parties be able to show up willingly, right? And that means we can't pressure one another, right? We can't guilt. We can't. I think the sexual context is so special, is so precious, that I think it's worth limiting our language a little bit. And again, not trying to pick on this person, they're doing very common linguistic things here. Um, I'm more reflecting about our culture broadly, right? But I think it's worth limiting our language a little bit to err on the side of carefulness as an act of loving kindness to one another. Um, that we really kind of say, okay, be honest with ourselves. Like, this isn't actually a need. And if I'm feeling that kind of intensity, I actually probably need to deal with that intensity first and not be putting that onto my partner, because I shouldn't do that in any kind of way, right? Because my partner can't fix me. They can't save me, right? Like, they can be beside me, they can hold me, right? But those are things that can only be freely given, right? They cannot be forced. They cannot be pressured. They cannot be coerced. They can't be manipulated through a temper tantrum, or silent treatment, or raising our voice or whatever, right? And I just think all of that, we're at risk of all of that if we start flirting with, pardon me, framing to ourselves and to our partner that this is a need, when again, strictly speaking, it's not, you know. Now, what's underneath of it might be a need, right? If it's like, well, I need to like be vulnerable with you in a certain way. Well, then, yeah, well, let's practice that, like, I need to allow myself to be held or to be loved in certain ways. Like, yeah, well, let's like work towards that. Let's get honest about that. But I think, sex is one of these areas where we are prone to shortcuts. I think I would say that's a big part of how our culture approaches sexuality, is it tries to use it as a shortcut, as opposed to doing healthy, difficult work to then enter into sex in a more healthy, whole way. And so in that sense, then we have a tendency to end up using each other, because we're approaching it in what can I get, as opposed to how can I give to you, right? And how can I allow myself to be given to? You can feel there the tenderness and the vulnerability of that. Very different than talking about need. Um, Now, we could think about need in terms of safety. I do have a need of safety, right? Relationally, especially in sex, right? So we could definitely talk about that. Yeah. So let me find where I am on my notes, because I've definitely meandered a little bit. um, Yeah, so I guess one thing I would say is, if you're still committed to um, framing something sexual in terms of a need, I'm not going to fight with you on that. Um, I obviously I've stated kind of my my thoughts and premise. But if you're going to frame it in terms of a need, I just want to invite some reflection on, well, what happens if you can't get that need met? Like, say your partner, for medical reasons, can't meet you in that way for a season, or maybe something happens such that they can't meet you in that way ever, for the rest of their life, rest of your lives together. Uh, are you going to how are you going to deal with that disappointment, right? Because again, need tends to connote sort of intensity, priority, these kinds of things. And so um, it there are going to be things that we think of as needs in life, or really intense longings, really intense wants, that maybe we don't get fulfilled at times. Maybe we never get them fulfilled. How are we relating to those areas? And I did a whole video on um, what do we do with our unfulfilled longings, I think was the title. And if I remember, I'll put that up on the screen. Um, and hopefully I'll have remembered to have put a link to the up on the screen as well to the crush video earlier. Uh, but yeah, what do we do with our unfulfilled longings? Because again, if I guess the invitation is just to really examine that you're not going into any kind of demand. That's the thing. Because even if you experience something as a need, it doesn't work to demand it. It just doesn't work relationally. We do violence to each other when we do that. Um, we can be very clear. This is really important to me. We can have boundaries of like, I'm not willing to, or I'm only willing to, right? That's fine. Um, but not for the purposes of forcing. That's kind of the thing. That's what I would just want us to be really, really careful about, especially around sexual things, because it is so intimate. It's such a vulnerable place. Such a vulnerable place. We're being with each other in our most intimate physiological and psychological ways. And so I want us to enter in with courage and boldness. Like, I'm not saying we need to be anemic, but I also want us to be really thoughtful and really careful, precisely because we matter to each other, right? Because we matter to ourselves and we matter to one another. So again, if you want to use the word needs, fine, but I'm wanting to invite this underlying reflection, right? So kind of getting into this person who's asking their question, they were making a connection. They were feeling a connection to the crush video. What should we do with a crush? How do we deal with a crush? And so, yeah, kind of exploring that more, is are we seeking something through the sexual encounter that actually we need to be addressing with ourselves first? Are we seeking something through role play, for example, that we actually need to more directly and honestly be working through inside of ourselves? Because if we do that, that actually frees us up to then bring a more unified self to one another, right? Where we still could explore role play and whatnot, but then it really becomes this mutual life-giving thing, as opposed to well, I need to take on a certain role, or I need you to take on a certain role, or whatever, so I can scratch a certain itch that I'm not willing to do the hard work to actually address more directly, right? And so again, this is where it's a little bit of a bypass, right? It's a little bit of an avoidance. And then it's like, well, is that really about connection? Or like is that I'm indirectly scratching the itch, instead of like, let me move towards that more directly, more honestly, more courageously, and then bring that more unified self, to my partner, which then can be lovely and lots of fun. So, there's tons of different role play scenarios. This person didn't, offer any details, which is understandable. Could feel very vulnerable to, get specific. But I'm just going to play with a couple of motifs here, just to kind of illustrate how we might sort of dig a little deeper. So I think about like a hero or being rescued sort of kind of role play, right? One person's being the hero. I mean, we tend to think of this as being the male or whatever, but it doesn't have to be. One person's being rescued. We tend to think of as being the female, but doesn't have to, right? Because it's like we're complicated beings. So either gender, could be drawn to either role. And in my work with clients, like I find that folks folks explore all sorts of different fantasies because it depends on their makeup and their background and their wounding and like what's needing addressing. What are they trying to work out? So thinking about like sort of that hero role play thing, right? Is there perhaps some underdeveloped assertiveness, an initiatory energy, healthy risk taking, right? Like, are there ways that this person, if they're drawn to like sort of a hero role play, um, that they are struggling to really own their life and sort of step into their life, right? In which case, like I would say, don't try to work that out through sex. Work that out, in a deeper way so that you can apply it to all of your life and then bring that vitalized energy to sex, right? Which will feel very different and it'll be a heck of a lot more fun. So, oh yeah. And so, kind of, thinking about this in the context of sex, right? This person, and I mean, there's a lot of different variations here, right? But such a person who's like, maybe thinking that hero role play, maybe they're more preoccupied with getting it right, as opposed to just being able to be grounded in themselves. Pardon me. And kind of follow their intuition in a collaborative way, right? Not a forceful way. But yeah, to kind of be able to sort of go on the adventure of being with themselves and their partner and each other's bodies in the moment, right? Like you can feel there's much more nuance and texture to that. That honestly is much richer than sort of a more simplistic, hero kind of role play, right? So again, it's like this is where it's like there's an invitation to go deeper into oneself, in order that you can actually live out the thing in a fuller way, right? So similar ways, thinking about the motif of like wanting to be rescued, right? Sort of in that hero rescuer kind of thing, hero being rescued kind of thing. I would wonder, is there like underdeveloped ability to know what you want, know your preferences, to ask for help, ask for assistance, ask for care, ask for a hug, right? So thinking about in the context of sex, this might show up as, are you preoccupied with, just like not disappointing your partner, as opposed to also allowing yourself to be a participant of like, so that could mean being able to say, oh no, do a little bit less of that, please, or a little bit more of this, or in some way or another communicating, what you want, right? So that you're showing up as an equal participant. Uh, so again, that's where it's like, the role play, if you're doing it as a way to solve that underlying dilemma, I don't think that's going to work very well. I think that's getting it backwards. I would say, like, be working to build these muscles, do whatever inner work you need to do, face whatever, unresolved stuff, such that you can show up in your life in general and in sex with that ability to be like, oh yes, please, more of this, or actually no, don't quite do that. That's not feeling very good, right? But to be able to ask for what you want, right? So another category here that can be really interesting is role play around things that to at least one of the individuals, or maybe both, feels in some way forbidden or transgressive. which doesn't necessarily mean those things are actually forbidden and transgressive or actually wrong or immoral or whatever, but there's, for whatever reasons, that it has those connotations, for at least one of the two of the people in the couple, and maybe both. And this, again, I think is really worth doing some inner work outside of sex first, right? Because it's like, if that's something that's really edgy and really fraught, it's like, you want to examine that, right? Like, you don't want to just force your way through that, like, I don't think that works very well. So like, what's coming up in you as you think about engaging in this, in this particular, behavior or encounter with your partner? What are the ways in which it's exciting and vitalizing, right? What are the ways in which it feels taboo? Because the goal, right, is that you be able to have your whole self integrated, right? And so, like, why am I not able to engage with this in any other way, right? Why am I not able to sort of look at myself in the mirror and be like, yeah, there's something about this, the idea of this, that's that's stimulating, but also maybe horrifying or whatever, maybe it's too strong a word, but disturbing or something. So because I think I suspect that this kind of category might often have to do with like parts of self that aren't fully integrated, parts of self that we've just denied or disowned. That doesn't mean those parts have to like come in and take over, but we want to like somehow work towards cohesion, right? Like that's that's kind of part of healing. So yeah, so again, I think there can be a lot of rich territory there. Especially actually occurs to me too, because stuff that feels transgressive can be tied in with various shame and guilt stuff. And some of that could be tied in with wounding, that feels, and potentially sexual wounding even, right? Didn't even have to be prior sexual encounters, but maybe just like some of the messaging we received around sex, how we're messaging about our bodies, and so it's like, let's work through all of that, so that we can bring more of ourself into the sexual relationship, right? So that we can really show up and not feel ashamed, as opposed to pretending we're not ashamed. Like, I'm not sure that really works. So I think, this kind of just brings me to just a general theme that you're hearing from here, which is that I perceive, it's my view, that I think our culture tends to ask sex to solve things it can't solve. I really see sex as being something that we can enter into beautifully as a result of having done some hard work, right? As opposed to it being a solution to whatever those unresolved things might be, right? Our culture, I think, tends to be like, oh, if we can just get to sex, then that'll solve like the relationship problems or whatever. And I just haven't observed that to work, precisely because it's such a sensitive, vulnerable area. Like, you can mask things for a while with sex, but I have not observed that to be sufficient in the long run. And then in some ways it can actually amplify the problems, and make them even worse. So it's like, don't use sex as a way of solving relationship problems. Use it as a clue, right? Like, use, your sexual fantasies, your, whatever sexual role plays you're thinking about doing, you like use those as invitations, right? And really be examining, okay, where do I feel like grounded and like, and able to enter into this in a playful, like giving way? Or is there stuff in me that's like, I'm actually not very settled, and there's lots of insecurities, there's shame, there's demand, there's, overwhelming hunger, right? Like, it's like, that's a lot of volatility to bring into something super tender and vulnerable, right? And so I would say, be talking about that with each other, but be working through it outside of sex, right? And probably, this is where probably somebody like a counselor or counselor type person would be really helpful, helping you sort of face and metabolize whatever's going on there, so that you can approach, those things truly from a place of play, right? As opposed to, potentially being really fraught. So let's segue to a bit more of a I don't know, just more challenging part of all this, which is thinking about harm, thinking about violence, right? I it's my impression that, like, things like choking, role playing, like rape fantasies, stuff like that, slapping, name calling, that these are a thing. And I have a really hard time. I have a hard time understanding how that's life giving to both parties, or to either party, honestly. Um, yeah, I'm pretty open, and I'm always looking for, trying to understand, right? It's just, yeah, it's really hard for me to understand, to make sense of those types of things being loving. Um, yeah. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I come from a Christian context, which in today's day and age, I feel like needs like 1,000 caveats, because there's a whole bunch of things I don't mean by that. Uh, so, um, my only point in mentioning that is, it could be, you might be tempted to be like, well, Sean's a Christian, so, Christians hate sex, blah, blah, blah. Which is not actually true, at least in terms of, you know, kind of the cores of the Christian faith. But there's plenty of reasons that you might think otherwise, because there's a lot of, there's a lot of unhealthy stuff that has gone on in so-called Christian contexts. So I'm not going to begin. I can't begin to address any of that here. I'm just acknowledging those elephants are in the room, and anytime we have this kind of conversation. Uh, but what I want to say is that the big parts of my Christian faith that would inform me here are kindness, being loving, being gentle, being tender, being vulnerable, being sacrificial, right? Like, not demanding, not coercing, not forcing, uh, inviting, um, being forgiving, being safe, all these kinds of things, right? All these attributes that don't gel very well with, hey, I want you to let me, slap you and call you terrible names, or, semi choke you or something like that. Um, I don't know. I just have a hard time fitting that, again, into a loving framework. Um, so, having said that, some of you may have some of those fantasies, and I'm not trying to shame you here, but I do want to gently invite some examination of what's going on with that, right? And I do this with my clients, right? Clients have sexual fantasies, whether that they're playing out through pornography, or that maybe they're, if I'm working with a couple, maybe it's stuff they're playing out in the relationship, and so it's like, okay, well, let's unpack this, right? What might this be about? Uh, so there are so many different permutations. I can't cover. I can't begin to cover everything here. So I'm just going to think into two really broad categories. I'm going to touch on, honestly, pretty lightly. So all of this deserves so much more. And if this is bringing up things for you that you have specific questions on, send those in. I would love to hear those. Right. So I'm thinking about kind of the two sides of fantasies about violating another, or fantasies about being violated, right? Uh, in some ways, this is like a more intense version of what we were talking about earlier. Or we might think about it. We might start to wonder about much more intense and dangerous, I would say, risky and probably not good way. Um, uh, version of that sort of hero being rescued, right? So I would wonder about, like, are there ways that, if you're on the side of you have fantasies about violating another, are there ways that you struggle to feel powerful in a healthy way in your life? Are there ways in which you've been violated, where you felt really powerless, and so you don't know how to enter into the vulnerability of sex without having to feel super powerful in such a way that you dominate. If those things are any of those things or other kind of adjacent things are the case, and you're actually watching this video, I just want to say that's amazing that you're hanging in here and watching this, because a lot of times when folks have wounding in these areas, it's so tender they're not gonna hang around and listen to someone like me, because that feels like admitting weakness, right? And that feels too sensitive, all these kinds of things. So, but if you do have some stuff, kind of in this domain, and you're actually you're engaging with me, I just want to say I'm really proud of you. I know I don't get the privilege of actually knowing you, but yeah, if this describes you, I'm proud of you that you're here and listening. Uh, and I'm sorry for whatever has happened to you. Um, yeah, I, I would want to be able to spend a lot more time with that and with you than this context allows. In a similar way, if you're someone you're drawn to the fantasy of being violated, I would wonder about, are you being drawn to, yeah, something that feels familiar? Are you replaying? Are you rehearsing past violations? Doesn't have to be sexual, even, right? It might be that there was a kind of degradation in your home growing up, or maybe in certain relational contexts, and now you're drawn to playing that out in a sexual way. And so again, I would say, like, get curious about that, and see if you can move towards the original pain, because that's actually what's going to heal you, right? Because look, on either side, which, if you're on either side of these things, like, we are precious beings. And so I think anytime that we're fantasizing about acting in a way that isn't really consistent with our being precious, our being valuable, we want to be curious about that. Don't shame yourself. That's not helpful. But wonder, like, well, I wonder what's going on with me here. Like, I wonder what some part of me is needing to work through. What's this trying to get my attention about? Don't just stay at the surface and be like, well, the only way I just have to choke them, or I have to be choked. Right? It's like, I think that's being lazy. Sorry, but I think that's being lazy. I think you're not listening to your insides. I think your insides are inviting you into something deeper, a deeper exploration. So yeah, yeah. Because look, the goal of sex, in my opinion, one of the goals of it is this honest, vulnerable encounter, right? Like, sex is not meant to be a place where we hide. Like, that's why we take our clothes off. So yeah, just be mindful that you're not hiding. So after all that, I do want to say a few more things in a positive way, about role play. So one of the things I want you to think about here is the emphasis on play. So one of the principles there is play has to be mutual, right? Like, it doesn't work. Have you watched this with kids, where one kid picks on the other and then says, oh, I was just playing. And it's like, yeah, well, it doesn't seem like it was actual play, because somebody ended up crying, right? So that was not successful play. So really, yeah, really, try to get a feel for play. Like play it's got this wonderful immersive quality where you're just being present, you're being in the moment, you're being with your own body and your partner's body, right? And so, like, really let that be sort of the beacon, right? Like, are we playing together? So if you're going to engage in sexual role play with your partner, like, the point of it is, let's play. Let's actually play. Let's not be trying to bypass things, trying to avoid, trying to hide from our junk, trying to get sex to solve something for us that it can't solve. Let's actually just play together, right? Like, let's enter into what children do naturally, right? So just in curiosity and in playing pretend and just having fun, right? Like, that, I think, is where sexual role play can be just a lot of fun and really life-giving. right? Can be because it's very, pardon me, very mutual, very life-giving, right? Like very respectful, very venturesome, like all the things, right? So don't be satisfied with shortcuts, right? But like, okay, we're gonna pretend to play. That doesn't work. Like it has to be real play. Um, so yeah, I think I think that might be all my thoughts. Um, and a good thing because I'm about out of time for recording. Um, yeah. So I hope that I hope this has been some helpful guidance. I hope that you have been able to hold shame at bay because I know this is vulnerable stuff. And yeah, that you'll do whatever inner work you need to do. And I hope that you get to play, like really play, really frolic together. Because that's what we're meant for, right? Like whether in the context of sex or just in the context of life, right? Like we're meant to play at all ages. But that has to come from a groundedness, from a security that we've grown into. You can't fake it. You can't steal it, by just pretending to be secure. You have to actually do the hard work. So be brave, face whatever you need to face in order that you can really be free to play, and to love and to be loved, to frolic together. Well, until next time, peace be with you.